I love British television, and as a lover of British television, I love the BBC, but there's one thing the BBC's done that I just can't forgive them for. The BBC has three main domestic channels: BBC One, the channel is people pleaser; BBC Two, the channel is skew, though not really by much these days; and BBC Four, for all the hoity-toity arts and cultural programming you already avoid museums for. Now you're probably asking, wait a minute, where's BBC Three? Funny thing about that. Yes, it existed, but it really doesn't anymore. BBC Three began on February 9th, 2003 as the BBC's newest attempt at getting young adult audiences. Its launch a mutation of the remit of BBC Choice, which BBC Three replaced. That channel started as an extra digital TV generalist option, but then started skewing younger after 2000. Over the years, the channel built up a rapport for creating unique programming across many genres, ultimately specializing in a variety of scripted series and groundbreaking documentaries. And that's not even mentioning the platform BBC Three gave to young talent and rising stars to kickstart and or further propel their careers. BBC Three made too many shows to list, so I'll just mention some of my favorites. Among my personal highlights are topical stand-up series Russell Howard's Good News, hard-hitting satirical The Revolution Will Be Televised, and school life sitcom Some Girls. Bonus shoutouts to whatever great movie or TV mistake show they put out at 7 p.m. for whatever reason, and the Mr. T hosted clip show World's Craziest Fools. Yes, I'll let that sink in. Mr. T hosted a clip show for a British television channel. There are plenty of BBC Three shows I could also point out that were bigger hits than the above, like Bad Education or Sun, Sex and Suspicious Parents, and quite a number of even award-winning programs, but you might as well just go read the Wikipedia article at that point. BBC Three had a lot going for it, and it all came crashing down in the 20-teens. In February 2014, the BBC announced they'd have to start making cuts at the corporation, and literally weeks later, BBC Three was put on the table. The specific plans involved converting the channel to an online-only service, slashing its programming budget, and, due to that, proceeding to refocus on short-form content. Beyond that, there'd also be an extension to the hours of CBBC, which BBC Three timeshared with, pushing £30 million of the planned savings from closing BBC Three back into an already well-funded BBC One drama budget, and launching the BBC's first timeshare channel, BBC 1+1, a move which, while more usual among the BBC's commercial rivals, wouldn't be a first for a PSB given just across the sea, Ireland's RTE1 runs a part-time timeshift channel of its own. Backlash about the closure abounded, especially from BBC Three's audience, myself unofficially included, and petitions and online protests were feverish in an attempt to stop the closure, or at least to get the BBC to reconsider. Heck, a production company that made quite a few BBC Three shows even offered to buy the channel to keep it on the air, but it seemed that from day one, the BBC had already made up its mind that BBC Three was meant to die. It was arbitrarily mentioned that BBC Four could get the axe too, though I doubt anyone who this closure affected really believed that at the time. Audiences for BBC One, BBC Two, and BBC Four were all in their 60s. The people at the top of the BBC making the decisions on this were of a similar age. At its most pessimistic, it was another classic example of the old looking down at whatever the young were into and casting it off as worthless, regardless of the details. Nowadays, it's those kind of people who get paid to write for one website or another about why millennials aren't buying yachts. And like the worst of such mindset-laden bureaucracies, how dare they enact something that would directly affect them? And so, over the next 2 years, BBC Three was put on a slow death march as whatever new content still running was either concluded, cancelled, or suspiciously promoted to BBC Two, or even BBC One in the turbulent case of unscripted format Don't Tell the Bride, and the channel's schedule itself increasingly became reruns, perhaps in a bid to justify after the fact their decision to close the channel. Finally, on a late Monday into early Tuesday, February 15th into the 16th, just before 4 a.m., after one last run of an episode of one of their biggest hits ever, Gavin and Stacey, BBC Three was no more, at least as a proper scheduled television channel. The BBC Three brand was moving online, the weak rationale they used to hide the fact to anyone not really following that the linear channel they had known and loved was ceasing to exist, the BBC Three name being reduced to being slapped on short-form content across various social networks in addition to the BBC's website, and maybe a few hours somewhere late in the schedules of BBC One and or Two, where it was certain to be far less advertised in favor of those channels' usual priorities. The channel fee itself stayed up for a whole month and a half after BBC Three's demise to promote the move online, though to satisfy some TV platforms' requirements that a channel actually air something on their channel space, the BBC had to run a few of BBC Three's former shows in overnight hours in order to keep the channel space up for the promotional loop. This all ended at 4 a.m. on March 31st, 2016, just after such a necessary rerun of a program that, ironically, has a title befitting of this entire BBC Three story: Murder in Successville. Not because it was a murder mystery sitcom with actors playing celebrities, but because the death of BBC Three was, indeed, the murder of a wildly successful channel, premeditated or not through the BBC's comments on the matter or lack thereof. Regardless, it was undeniable that BBC Three filled a unique role not just in programming for young adults, but in the UK television landscape in general. ITV2 and E4, BBC Three's main rivals for this segment, simply don't approach this audience in the same way. While ITV2 especially has tried somewhat to push into the kind of area BBC Three used to cover, even acquiring Family Guy and American Dad from the BBC even before BBC Three closed, those channels' hearts are simply located elsewhere, and they'd rather pump their 24-hour schedules full of American imports and main channel repeats than travel beyond a few hours of new domestic content a week, in first runs only, with hardly the same amount of interest in storytelling or in ambition that BBC Three had. And 5 Star, the other youth-skewing commercial channel, even caring about this sort of thing? Ha! Forget about it. We don't know how many other ways the BBC could have made the level of cuts needed in a way that would have saved BBC Three, though given further rounds are in progress, we're sure to find out, and nowadays BBC Three is a shell of its former self. I explain how and what I think it means to the BBC in the future in the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss that. I'm Benzie Johnson Jr. and I'm enthusiastic about television, and if you are too or just interested in looking around, then hit subscribe so you don't miss multiple new videos every single week. I'll see you next time.